The following podcast is a little fiery but mostly peaceful. If you're an automaton, turn away now and shelter in place. If you're a Catholic ready to renew your prescriptions of red pills and white pills, stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Catholics Aren't Zombies. I'm your host, Chris Bunier. Russia. Today we're going to have a little international flavor to the non-zombie podcast. Russia. Now there's a country that, along with Germany, has always been in this race to the bottom for the title of sick man of Europe. Really sad place. Now see, if you've paid any attention to the messages from Our Lady of Fatima, or you've just been tuned into Catholic media for any length of time, you've heard of Russia, and you've probably heard something about the consecration of Russia to Our Lady's Immaculate Heart. You may or may not have heard that, well, the consecration, which was requested by Our Lady, was not really completely done. It was supposed to be done by the Pope with the unity of all the bishops of the entire Catholic Church, consecrating Russia to her Immaculate Heart. Now, it's been sort of attempted, sort of not. I don't want to get into every detail. That's not the scope of the show. But long story short, it appears that it has not exactly been done the way it was requested, and unfortunately, Russia and the rest of the world continue to suffer. But why does consecration to the Immaculate Heart of Mary matter? There's three big reasons I'm going to identify, and then I'm going to focus on the last one. First of all, we're commanded by heaven to do it. Our Lady told the seers at Fatima very specifically to do it. Secondly, it's to stop the spread of Russia's errors. Third, how about the actual healing of Russia itself? That's what I want to focus on today. See, I think perhaps those of us in Western civilization, those of us in the West, well, we get caught up in that part about the spread of the errors of Russia and how it might impact us or how it might overall destroy the world. And of course, that's important, no doubt about it. Souls are at stake. But does anybody ever spend any time examining how bad it has gotten in Russia itself? Because we know, as we're taught, that by their fruits you'll know them. You'll know something is jacked up by bad fruits. And I guess what I've noticed, and other people have as well, is that it is, not only is it not good in Russia, it is really, really markedly bad in Russia. And I'm going to detail exactly how bad it's gotten and why you should take notice and why this will impact you. Before I do that, though, let's take a look at the errors of Russia, explain that real quick, and then we'll go into the manifestation of those errors in Russia. The biggest error of Russia is no doubt material atheism. This goes back at least to the Bolshevik Revolution, where that was what they were seeking to implement. A revolution of the old monarchy that was still tied to Christendom, albeit the Eastern variety. They wanted that gone so they could implement material atheism. That's basically the bulwark of communism. You do not have communism with Christianity. They're not compatible. They never have been. The ideas of tyrannical communism, which is nothing new, it could go back to ancient times, has no place with the message of the gospel. Render under Caesar, yes, but Caesar's not supposed to be a crazy dictatorial tyrant. So that's the big one right there. Material atheism, the idea of divorcing God from everything and just focusing on this fictitious caricature of rich versus poor. That's all they ever go on and on and on about. And they use it to manipulate people. They think religion is the opiate of the masses, and their goal is to simply get rid of it because it gets in their way of world conquest. The other errors, so communism, but also, look, it's not just government and politics. Abortion, sexual depravity, disintegration of the family, substance abuse, despair. These are the errors of Russia, and as I'm about to demonstrate, these are the things that have engulfed Russia. This is why that place has become a very sad, sick man of Europe. What are the manifestations of these errors? Well, so much loss of faith. Now, towards the end of the episode, I'm going to talk a little bit about the schism at 1054, so hold off on that. But Russia is not a place known for faith. Now, I'm not going to spend all day chastising or castigating Russia, whether or not their people have faith or not. That's a little hard to assess, and ultimately, only God knows what's in people's hearts. But the really demonstrable statistics and natural side effects of Russia's communism are really super obvious, and we can identify them with basic descriptive statistics. Suicide rates in Russia are the highest among the world. has a lot to do with the alcoholism in Russia, which is also notoriously high. There's that stereotype. Everybody over there is addicted to vodka, or they drink their sorrows away. There seems to be some evidence of that. Single-parent households. Russia is second only to the United States in terms of single motherhood throughout the entire world. And we know how bad we have it here, right? Single moms all over the darn place. Well, Russia's right behind us. The divorce rate. The divorce rate in Russia is worse than the EU, the United Kingdom, and Australia. You take the entire European Union, in the United Kingdom and Australia, they're worse than all of them. Now, granted, there's been a little bit of an increase in marriages, but it's also come with a corresponding increase in divorces. I talk about this a little bit in Caesar Vacantism, my chapter on outbreeding the losers, and how the biggest problem we have in terms of developing large Christian families is the fact that men and women, well, they get along about as well as the Bloods and Crips. Now, of course, we get caught up in America's the center of the universe mode, but we forget, hey, you know what? The folks on the other side of the world have this problem just as bad, if not worse. Russia has it even worse than we do, if you can possibly imagine that. If you don't believe me and you don't think all the alcoholism and suicide and all of these things are eroding away at the strength of the Russian families, well, maybe you can recall that even back in the 90s, there's that stereotype of the mail-order Russian bride. If you were in America and you were a rich guy and you wanted to find a desperate wife, Russia's always been the place to go. Now we can see this even clearer with the Russian divorce rate. They're way ahead of all the other countries with no-fault divorce. When Our Lady told us that Satan's last big battle against us was going to be a war against the family, we can see this because women and men don't get along at all, evidenced by the divorce rate, evidenced by all these obstacles that are in the way of couple formation and the proliferation of families. And you can kind of feel bad for these women in Russia. Like, no wonder they want to jump across the ocean and come live over here. I mean, there's that old stereotype that Russian dudes are just hanging out and getting drunk as a monkey off vodka all the time. Yeah, when you look at the data, it seems to sort of bear that out a little bit. So Russian families are struggling just as badly, if not worse, than ours. Now, here's the kicker, that Russia also leads the world in abortions. Not nominally. I understand, yes, China, the U.S., other places have more nominally, but Russia has the highest rate by far. If you look at it in terms of how many abortions committed per 1,000 women. Look at it in terms of proportionality, Russia is way ahead. Russian women and men, they may not get along at all in terms of getting married and having families, but for some reason they seem to be able to get along well enough to fornicate and have abortions, sadly. The abortion rate in Russia, and I'm going to include this in the show notes, 53 abortions per 1,000 women. And they're way ahead of the next closest offenders. Vietnam and Kazakhstan, they're the next closest. Vietnam's 35.2, Kazakhstan's 35 out of 1,000. And then kind of a big gap. Then there's Belarus, another former Soviet country, Romania, and the Ukraine. So the former Soviet countries are really way worse than you would think on abortion. You see, we've fallen into this mentality of thinking, this is an American leftist sort of problem. This is all the result of our contraceptive mentality, and it is. But there's other places in the world that are even worse than us, and a lot of it, I think, is just this post-communist despair, this desolate, awful, sad, morose despondency that they have over there now. And because yes, there was the collapse of the Soviet Union, but nature abhors a vacuum. There's been a void there, and that void, it was never filled by a return to the faith, returning to Catholicism, returning to a vibrant Christianity. Unfortunately, it just seems like, they just got a sicker version of communism, basically. And on the abortion issue, just to give you a reference, the U.S. is 20.8. 20.8 abortions out per 1,000 women. We're in the top dozen or so out of a couple hundred countries in the world. But again, Russia is way the heck ahead of everybody. This is significant. Again, this should give people wonder, like, why do we talk so much about the errors of Russia? Why do we talk so much about consecrating Russia to Our Lady's Immaculate Heart? Well, it's got as much to do with mercy towards Russia as it does anything else, and I think we lose sight of that aspect of it. Another thing that I believe people have forgotten or maybe don't pay enough attention to is that Russia and the entire eastern part of the early church is still in schism with the rest of the Catholic Church. They have a continuous line of secession of their bishops, their clergy, going back to the beginning. So they have valid sacraments. There's still a church there. And I think sometimes we overlook that because, oh, well, I guess they're not as bad as the Protestants. It's not like they set up non-denominational churches where they don't even really have a real liturgy. They just jump around and sing. We think, oh, they have beautiful liturgy. They have icons. They're just like us with, 2 or 3 little differences. Oh, who cares? The schism isn't that bad. But we're coming up on 1,000 years since that schism of 1054. And maybe it really is the case that this consecration of Russia to Our Lady's Immaculate Heart actually does have a lot to do with mending that gap that's been allowed to persist for so long for a segment of Christianity that didn't seem to want to completely revolutionize the way the faith was exercised the way Luther and Calvin did. They wanted to basically turn the faith on its head and take away all of its richness. But the folks in the East, in Russia, they kept most of it. It was, all right, disagreement over the filioque part and the creed and a few other things. But it was mainly an East versus West pissing contest. This schism had more to do with where you were positioned on a map. That's insane. Think about it. Think of all the disputes you ever have with anybody. Does where you are in location to the other person the source of the dispute? If you're going to fight about something, at least have it grounded in ideas, in these deeper philosophical, theological concepts. Let's be honest, they split from us based on geography. And since that hasn't been healed, I can't help but think that's got a lot to do with the pain that part of the world has experienced, the lack of overall Christian unity, and there's no doubt in my mind that this has at least something, one way or the other, to do with this spread of Russia's errors, with this call for the consecration. There's no doubt in my mind. And I compare them to Germany in a lot of ways because these are the two sick men of Europe if you look at it over the last several hundred years. Not the most vibrant, prospering places, but they've been the home of the 2 worst heresies, I would say, since the Arian crisis. I'll be the first to admit that basically anywhere you go in the world right now is jacked up one way or the other. There's no paradise on earth ever, but especially right now. There's no sanctuary you're going to go run and hide to. There's no wild, wild west that you could go colonize and be rid of all the wickedness that's going on. Certainly, France, you could see what's going on there with all the no-go zones and riots and, the cathedral in Notre Dame being set on fire last year, all the Muslim invasion. But it's been even worse and I think longer and more enduring than in places like Germany and Russia. It's a little hard to have perspective on it because every area's had some kind of really big heresy. You could look at England with the split from the church by the Anglicans, King Henry VIII. So I don't want to pick on Russia or Germany. But like I said, I can't help but think that the fact that some of the biggest heresies have come from those places, and you've had these really wicked cult of personality types like Luther, like Stalin, like Lenin, like Marx. I mean, look at the parallels between Karl Marx and Martin Luther. Both of them were overweight. Both of them suffered from bizarre skin infections like staph infection. Both of them had horrible relations with their families and having bastard children out of wedlock and things of that sort. And they're also both total cranks that have contributed to the worst ideologies in the history of the world. Russia took the intellectualization of these evil ideas by Karl Marx and just ran off a cliff with it. And so it's so sad. Now, you might be wondering, okay, so what can we do about it? So there doesn't seem to be a lot of practical implications for somebody listening to this in Western, in the Western world, in America. What are some practical solutions? There's not many. The big thing is we got to pray for the consecration of Russia. You've heard maybe Father Isaac Mary Relier mention this ad nauseum. It wasn't done correctly. It wasn't done with the union of all the bishops of the world. Until that happens, the misery all around the world, Western civilization, Russia, China, this stuff's not going away. So we've got to continue to pray. But there is one thing that I would encourage people to do, is I've given you a snapshot of this. One practical thing you can do, educate yourselves on how bad things are in Russia and why they are that way. Then you can see how and why these errors have spread everywhere like wildfire. And then, of course, you can use that to improve your life. But, hey, this is why you don't want abortion. This is why you don't want to get hooked on alcohol. This is why you can't just fornicate and live a life of hedonism. This is why you don't want to go carrying around pictures of Chairman Mao. All right, so that's all I got today. I just wanted to give a quick lamentation on Russia, why I believe that has implications on the rest of us. You should pray for Russia. And if you like what you've heard, hope you can check out my website, ditchthestate.loveholychurch.com. Buy my book, Seeds of Vacantism. I've got a whole chapter where I talk about all the other countries in the world, and they've got the same problem we do with the false Caesars, with the lack of rule of law. There's so much sadness and despair. So check that out. You can find out way more in detail. Pray the rosary every day, and other than that, have a good one. Cue the music.